This video is brought to you by Colorware. With tons of color combinations for several devices, Colorware makes it easy to customize your tech. Whether you want paint or a wrap, click the link in the description to get started. As a bonus, use code TEAMJJC at checkout to save 10% on your next order.
Yo, what's good, friends? It's Jonathan, and welcome back to another JC production where I deliver your daily dose of hotness. And in this video, we're going to be looking at some comparison hotness between two phones that when you combine their names, you get an algebraic equation that even Gandalf couldn't solve. I'm talking about the Oneplus 7 Pro versus the iPhone XR in an epic, not so budget camera showdown. Only one winner is gonna leave this ring. Let's go ahead and jump straight to it, beginning with the front-facing camera.
Yo, what's going on, friends? It's Jonathan, and right now we have the Oneplus 7 Pro going against the iPhone XR. This is the front-facing camera test. Over here we have the Oneplus 7 Pro. Over here the iPhone XR. Which one looks better? I mean, which one sounds better? The audio. Which one has better stabilization? Probably neither one. Which one has better colors? Let me know down in the comment section what you guys think, and we're gonna go ahead and proceed with the video.
Let me just say that this was the closest camera test I have ever had a chance to do. The color renditioning and camera processing on these two phones is so close that I seriously had an extremely difficult time telling them apart in most instances. During my testing, I automatically assumed the iPhone photos were better by simply judging how each photo looked on the phone screens. After putting them on the computer and looking at them on a larger, more calibrated display, I was definitely mistaken. In good lighting situations, these images will be indistinguishable for most people. That said, there are some subtle differences if you look closely. During the day, the iPhone XR tends to have more contrast and saturation, which you can see in the reds right here. It also keeps more parts of the image sharp with less depth of field. The Oneplus 7 Pro, in my opinion, produces a more true-to-life image while also having more depth of field by blurring out the foreground and the background. This is another example of what I mean by the iPhone having more contrast and saturation. Another difference is in exposure. One thing I noticed about the Oneplus 7 Pro is that it tends to overexpose slightly, which can be seen in the blue sky. By simply bringing the midtones down in an editor, you can see you're left with a nearly identical image. Funny enough, the iPhone isn't always the one with increased saturation and contrast, as you can see here. However, the Oneplus 7 Pro is also miscalculating the white balance, I feel, which is producing the weird clay-looking color on the doors and the brick. The iPhone XR is definitely more accurate here, but still off a little bit. While I would say the Oneplus 7 Pro is sharper than the iPhone XR, the iPhone XR tends to hold more detail. I know this may not make any sense at first, but Philip Bloom did a really good video where he breaks down sharpness versus detail in an Osmo Action vs GoPro video. I'll link it down in the description if you feel like checking it out. HDR is an entirely different story. The iPhone XR, for the most part, is consistent when it comes to its HDR approach. When it really cranks out HDR, it over-accentuates colors and nearly removes all shadows, as you can see here. The Oneplus 7 Pro, however, looks way more natural and retains plenty of contrast while still delivering excellent dynamic range. That said, this isn't consistent across the board. Here's an example where it's almost like the HDR processing flip-flopped, and now the OnePlus is trying to remove the shadows while the iPhone retained plenty of contrast. So ultimately, it's going to come down to what you're taking a picture of and the type of environment you're in. I mean, after taking well over 100 photos, I'm totally blown away by how close these two cameras are. Since this camera test was performed prior to the latest Oxygen OS 9.5.5 update, and I have yet to receive that update, I did encounter some focusing issues from time to time, like you can see here. I tried for the life of me to get the Oneplus 7 Pro to focus, and it just wouldn't do it. Once I receive the newest update, I'll definitely put together a dedicated Oneplus 7 Pro camera video. Flares are controlled much better on the OnePlus, which is for better or for worse, depending on if you like flares. Take this shot for example, where the sky was really overexposed on the OnePlus, but it still has plenty of detail in the tree and no flare. The iPhone XR retained all of the sky color, but has a huge flare which blocked the visibility of any detail in the tree. One extremely important thing to take into consideration here is that the OnePlus has a triple camera setup while the iPhone XR is a single camera. The standard, wide, and telephoto lenses really open up doors to getting better shots and adding value to the Oneplus 7 Pro. Portrait mode is definitely a win for the Oneplus 7 Pro when it comes to flexibility, since it can take a shot with any subject and not just faces. In terms of quality and consistency, I would say the iPhone XR is a bit better, but it's not by much. Also, the iPhone XR gives you a much wider field of view for portrait mode, while the OnePlus 7 Pro is using the 3x telephoto lens, giving you a super punched in crop field of view. Front-facing portrait mode on both of these phones did okay at times and then terrible at times. The iPhone XR fails when the background is complex, and you can really see it here. It gave me a Frankenstein screw coming out of my head, while the OnePlus 7 Pro has weird artifacts all around my body. When they both hit in good lighting, the OnePlus 7 Pro looks better in my opinion. It has plenty of detail and it's shareable right away. Not to mention, it's slightly wider. The iPhone XR on the other hand is sharper and has more contrast, which is great for some situations, but honestly, I don't want y'all seeing every imperfection on my face and getting up close and personal with my hair follicles. Low light portrait mode looks awful on the OnePlus 7 Pro due to having to use the 3x zoom lens. It's really muddy and completely messes up the colors, while the iPhone XR tends to be much sharper and renders colors much better. Speaking of low light, this is where things get rather interesting. As the sun was going down, there was a time where the iPhone XR could not nail the white balance at all, no matter how many times I took the shot. The OnePlus 7 Pro nailed it pretty much every single time. For the most part, the OnePlus and the iPhone XR are 50-50. Depending on the scenario, one would outperform the other. For example, here you can see the Planet Hollywood sign on the XR photo looks excellent, where for some reason the OnePlus turned it completely white. The same thing happened here with the AMC sign. The iPhone XR is properly exposed, while the OnePlus 7 Pro overexposed and messed up the colors entirely. With all that in mind, here you can see the OnePlus 7 Pro nailed the exposure while the iPhone XR overexposed, losing quite a bit of detail. Colors look more punchy and vibrant on the OnePlus, and in my opinion, this image looks ready to go straight out of the camera. Here's another example of the OnePlus delivering a more punchy image and controlling the highlights much better than the iPhone XR, even though the iPhone XR does have more detail in the shadows. One thing I noticed with the OnePlus 7 Pro in low light is that it tends to land cold a lot of the times. You can see it here with the carousel lights and even in the sky. The iPhone XR tends to land warm in nearly every shot, creating a grayer looking sky versus the OnePlus 7 Pro's bluish sky. Looking at my Danny Coca-Cola shot impression, the OnePlus 7 Pro actually produces deeper, richer, and dare I say, better looking reds. This honestly took me by surprise since this is one of the shots that make most phones fail, but in the end, I still gotta give it to the iPhone. The issue with the OnePlus in this particular frame is the hypersaturation of the reds, the overexposure, and the noise reduction being overly aggressive, which can be seen in the detail on the pavement. Speaking of noise reduction is great on both phones, but handled differently by both as well. The iPhone lets in a little bit more noise, that way it can keep things sharp, whereas the OnePlus has more aggressive noise reduction, which actually still looks great, but does affect the sharpness and detail of the image. Switching things over to video, let me quickly state that the OnePlus 7 Pro shoots in BT 2020 or HDR video. When looking at it on a computer, the colors are going to be really saturated and overexposed. You need to convert the BT 2020 footage to Rec 709 in order to view what it looks like on your phone when you're taking the video. So with that being said, the iPhone XR can shoot 4K video in 24, 30, and 60 frames per second, while the OnePlus can shoot in 4K at 30 and 60 frames per second. This is where things get weirder. Since I shot this video in 30 frames per second, I didn't do anything with 24 frames per second on the iPhone. The iPhone's 30 frames per second looks better to me, being that it's smoother. Not to mention the OnePlus gets strange artifacts sometimes, which you can see in the road right here slightly. This is due to compression and bitrate. It's not like this in every shot, but ones with a lot of motion, it can really be seen. Switching things to 60 frames per second, the OnePlus 7 Pro in my opinion looks better, even if it's only slightly, it's still a better looking image. This is so strange to me since 60 frames per second is much harder to do than 30 frames per second. Even in low light, the 60p footage on the OnePlus 7 Pro looks incredible, especially versus the iPhone XR. But here we go again, when you switch to 30 frames per second, the OnePlus 7 Pro falls apart and the iPhone XR looks much better. Oh yeah, and I know many of you want to know what the audio would sound like in a concert type setting, so here's an example of what both phones' microphones would pick up. When it comes to slow motion, both the OnePlus 7 Pro and iPhone XR can do 1080p up to 240 frames per second, but the OnePlus 7 Pro can also do 480 frames per second at 720p. When both phones are set to 240 frames per second, the iPhone is slightly sharper in most cases, but it's very, very minute, as you can see here. Just like all the other samples, even in slow motion, it's just so similar. Stabilization on both phones, from my experience, is about the same. The OnePlus 7 Pro might be a tad bit better, but from my testing, it isn't by much. All in all, both of these phones' cameras are great, and honestly, if I was heading out on vacation, I wouldn't have a problem bringing either one of these phones and relying on it for my family vacation photos. Where the iPhone XR does seem to be a little bit more consistent and has a slight edge in quality, the OnePlus 7 Pro gives you a lot of flexibility with a wider feature set, ultimately giving you more creativity with your video and your photos. We also can't forget that the OnePlus 7 Pro has a built-in Pro mode with the ability to capture raw photos right inside the native camera app. There's no reason to download a third-party app and pay for one, whereas the iPhone cannot do it without downloading a third-party app. Whether or not you're just going by the cameras on these two phones or both phones as a whole, if you were to ask me today which one of these two phones I recommend you run out and buy, it's gonna be the OnePlus 7 Pro all day long. It provides a better value for your dollar. It has a wider feature set. It has a camera that can keep up with the iPhone XR, and it just looks a lot better. The only reason why I would go with the iPhone XR is if I needed a phone on iOS, but that's a different story. It's a whole nother video. We can always do a full comparison between these two, or we can put the OnePlus 7 Pro up against a different phone. You guys let me know down in the comments. Now, you know I gotta ask, between these two phones, when it comes to this camera shootout, which one looked better to you? To me, you know it's gonna go to the OnePlus 7 Pro. Leave it down below. I wanna hear back from you guys. If you enjoyed this video, smack that thumbs up button. If you like this type of content and you wanna see more camera content, go ahead and subscribe. Make sure you click that bell icon so you can be alerted when new hotness drops. If you have any questions, concerns, feedback, save it for your mama, because we don't deal with that around here. I'm just kidding, you can hit me up on social. Other than that, I will talk to you beautiful, sexy mathematicians in the next video.